There is a kind of person who can sit in a quiet room for hours and feel something most people would never expect them to feel. Not loneliness, not restlessness, not the creeping anxiety of having nothing to do and no one to do it with. What they feel is something closer to relief, something closer to fullness, something that, if you press them to name it, they might describe as being exactly where they need to be. And the world has never quite known what to do with them, because we live in a culture that treats solitude like a symptom, like something to be diagnosed, corrected, overcome. If you are not filling your calendar, you are wasting your life. If you are not surrounded by people, something must be wrong. If you can sit alone on a Saturday night and genuinely not wish you were somewhere else, you are either lying to yourself or you are broken in some way that hasn't been named yet. But here is what that culture keeps getting wrong. There exists a specific kind of person who not only tolerates being alone, they need it. They are nourished by it. They return to it the way others return to sleep, the way lungs return to breath. And they are not broken. They are not antisocial. They are not secretly miserable beneath a composed exterior. They are something far more psychologically interesting than any of those dismissive explanations allow. This is the psychology of people who never get bored being alone. And if you are one of them, or if you have ever wondered what it is that makes some minds genuinely thrive in silence, while others panic at the first hint of it, what follows will give you something you may have spent a long time looking for. Not just an explanation, a language, a map for terrain you have been navigating without one. Let us begin with the most common misunderstanding, because it shapes everything else. People who love being alone are not people who dislike other people. That is the story the world tells about them, and it is almost entirely wrong. The confusion happens because we tend to think of social behavior on a single axis. You either want to be around people or you do not. You are either warm or cold, open or closed, present or withdrawn. But human psychology is not that simple, and the people we are talking about are proof of that. Many of the individuals who most deeply enjoy solitude are also among the most perceptive, emotionally attuned, and genuinely caring people you will ever encounter. They notice things. They notice the slight change in your voice when you are pretending to be fine. They notice the way someone's eyes go flat when they smile, but don't mean it. They notice the emotional undercurrents in a room long before anyone else has registered that something is off. And that noticing, that deep and constant receptivity to the emotional texture of the world around them, is precisely why they need so much time away from it. When you absorb more, you need more space to process what you have absorbed. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system working exactly as it should. Think of it this way. If you are someone who experiences the world at a higher resolution than most, then every social interaction carries more data, more nuance, more emotional weight, more subtle information that your nervous system is quietly cataloging and attempting to make sense of. A dinner party that leaves most people feeling pleasantly tired leaves someone like this genuinely depleted. not because they did not enjoy it, not because they did not connect, but because they were processing on a level that most of the other people in the room were not even aware was happening. Solitude is not where these people go to escape the world. It is where they go to finish digesting it. Psychologists have studied this extensively, and what the research reveals is both validating and profound. People who score high on measures of introversion and sensory processing sensitivity, a trait identified by psychologist Elaine Aron and studied across decades of research, show measurably different patterns of neural activity. Their brains process stimulation more deeply. They make more connections between incoming information and existing memory and emotional context. They are, in a very literal, neurological sense, doing more with every experience. And the consequence of that is real. The consequence is that the world is louder for them, more textured, more complex, more exhausting in its constant demand for response and reaction and performance. And solitude is the only environment where that demand goes quiet. If this is already resonating with you, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and there is a lot more of this kind of content here for you. This is what psychologists sometimes call sensory processing sensitivity, and it is estimated to be present in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. That means roughly 1 in 5 people you know may be navigating a world that is simply more intense for them than it is for everyone else. And most of them have spent their entire lives being told that their need for quiet is a problem, when in reality, it is a natural and healthy response to how their minds actually work. But there is more to this than neurology, because the love of solitude is not only about nervous system architecture, it is also about something that develops over time, through experience, through learning, through the slow accumulation of understanding about what the world does and does not offer. Many people who deeply enjoy being alone did not always feel this way, or rather, they always had the capacity for it, but they learned to value it through a specific kind of discovery. The discovery that the inner world is reliable in a way the outer world sometimes is not. Think about what happens when you grow up in an environment where your emotional depth is not matched, where you try to share something real and are met with dismissal or confusion, or the kind of uncomfortable silence that tells you clearly that what you just offered was too much, where you reach for connection and find instead a kind of surface-level interaction that leaves you feeling more alone than you felt before you tried. Over time, the mind learns. It is extraordinarily good at learning, and what it learns in those moments is that not every space is safe for your full self, that not every conversation is worth entering, that sometimes the most peaceful and dignified choice is to keep your inner life to yourself, not because you are hiding, but because you have learned to protect something precious from environments that cannot hold it carefully. This is not bitterness. This is not damage, though it can look like both from the outside. This is a kind of intelligent adaptation, a rerouting of emotional energy toward the one environment that has proven consistently safe, consistently nourishing, consistently honest. The self, the inner world, the quiet room where no one misunderstands you because no one else is there. And here is what develops inside that quiet room over years of choosing it. Something remarkable. Something that most people who are always surrounded by noise never quite have the chance to build. People who spend significant time alone develop what psychologists call a rich inner world. And this phrase sounds almost quaint, almost old-fashioned, until you understand what it actually means. It means a highly developed capacity for reflection, for meaning-making, for the kind of deep internal processing that turns raw experience into genuine understanding. It means a mind that does not simply move from moment to moment, consuming and discarding, but one that turns experiences over carefully, examines them from multiple angles, extracts from them something that can be carried forward. People who love being alone tend to replay conversations not out of anxiety, though anxiety can be part of it, but out of genuine intellectual and emotional engagement with what happened. They analyze moments, they question their own reactions, they revisit decisions. They are living their lives twice, once in the outer world and once in the inner one. And the second living is often where the real meaning gets made. This is why solitude is so strongly linked to creativity. When external input decreases, internal pattern recognition increases. Ideas that were obscured by the noise of constant interaction suddenly become visible. Connections form between concepts that seemed unrelated. Emotions that were too crowded to fully feel suddenly have room to surface and be understood. The creative mind does not just need inspiration from the outside world. It needs silence in which to work with what it has already gathered. Research consistently bears this out. Studies on creative individuals across fields, from writers to scientists to musicians to visual artists, show a striking pattern of deliberate solitude as a central practice, not as a byproduct of their work, but as an essential condition for it. The quiet is not incidental to the creativity. The quiet is where the creativity lives. But let us go deeper, because there is something happening in people who genuinely thrive alone that goes beyond creativity, beyond nervous system sensitivity, beyond even the learned value of inner life. There is a particular relationship with the self that develops in people who choose solitude, and it is one of the most psychologically significant things we can talk about. When you spend real time alone, not distracted time, not scrolling through your phone time, but genuinely quiet and present time with yourself, you are forced into a kind of confrontation that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You have to face your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own values, and the places where you are or are not living up to them. There is no group consensus to hide behind, no borrowed opinions, no social cues telling you how to feel about something. It is just you and the unmediated experience of being yourself. And that confrontation, uncomfortable as it often is, produces something extraordinary. It produces integrity, not in the moralistic sense, but in the structural sense. The sense of being integrated, coherent, aligned. People who spend significant time alone tend to know themselves in ways that people who are constantly surrounded by others often do not. They know what they actually believe, not what they are supposed to believe. They know what they actually want, not what looks good or makes a sense on paper. They know their own emotional patterns, their triggers, their tendencies, their shadows. Psychologists call this self-concept clarity, and research shows it is strongly associated with psychological well-being, resilience, and the ability to make decisions that are genuinely aligned with one's values rather than driven by social pressure or external expectation. People who know themselves well are harder to manipulate, harder to destabilize, harder to convince that they need to be different from who they are. And all of that clarity is built slowly and quietly in the space that most people are too afraid to enter. Because here is the truth about why so many people dread being alone. It is not boredom they are afraid of. Boredom is just the surface explanation, the one that is socially acceptable to admit. What lives beneath the boredom, what makes the silence genuinely threatening to a certain kind of person, is the self. Being alone means being with yourself. And if you have not made peace with yourself, if there are things inside you that you have been running from, thoughts that feel dangerous, feelings that feel overwhelming, truths about your life that you are not ready to look at, then silence is not peaceful. It is terrifying. It is the thing that keeps you reaching for your phone at 2 a.m, turning on the television the moment you walk through the door, filling every quiet moment with noise before it has a chance to speak. I want to pause here and ask you something. When did you first realize that you were different in this way? That the silence other people seemed to dread was actually where you felt most like yourself? If you remember that moment, share it in the comments. Those kinds of realizations tend to matter more than we give them credit for. People who never get bored being alone have, in one way or another, made a kind of peace with themselves. Not a perfect peace. Not a peace that means they are without struggle or doubt or darkness, but a peace that means they are no longer running. They have turned toward themselves rather than away, and they have found that what is there, even the difficult parts, is survivable, is interesting, is, in some important sense, home. This is what psychologists sometimes refer to in the context of intrapersonal functioning, the quality of the relationship you have with your own inner life. And it turns out that this relationship, the one you have with yourself, is foundational to virtually every other aspect of psychological health. How you regulate your emotions, how you set boundaries, how you tolerate uncertainty, how you recover from setbacks. All of it is built on the quality of that inner relationship. And solitude is where that relationship is cultivated. There is also something important to understand about what people who love being alone are actually doing in that solitude. Because from the outside, it can look like nothing. It can look like staring at the ceiling, or sitting in a garden, or going for a long walk alone, or reading for hours, or working on something quietly without any apparent urgency or productivity. It can look, to someone who does not understand it, like wasted time. But what is actually happening is a process that neuroscientists call default mode network activation. When the brain is not focused on external tasks, it does not simply go quiet. It becomes active in a different way. The default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions, lights up during rest and solitude, and it is responsible for some of the most sophisticated cognitive processes we engage in. Self-referential thinking, perspective-taking, moral reasoning, autobiographical memory, future planning, the integration of emotional experience. In other words, when you are sitting alone and apparently doing nothing, your brain is doing some of its most important work. It is making sense of your life. It is integrating your experiences. It is building the narrative of who you are and what your experiences mean. It is, in the deepest sense, thinking. And people who regularly spend time in solitude are giving their brains the conditions they need to do that work well. There is a reason that many of the most significant insights in human history, scientific, philosophical, artistic, spiritual, have come to people in moments of solitude. Newton, under the apple tree. Darwin on his thinking path. Woolf in her room of her own. The pattern is not coincidental. The quiet is not the absence of something. The quiet is the condition for something. The condition for the kind of thinking that changes things. Now let us talk about something that is rarely discussed honestly in conversations about people who love solitude. The grief that can live alongside it. Because it would be incomplete and dishonest to speak only of the strengths, only of the richness and the clarity and the creativity, without acknowledging that there is also a particular kind of loneliness that can accompany this way of being in the world. It is not the loneliness of having no one around. That is the easy kind to explain. It is the loneliness of being different in a way that is invisible. The loneliness of watching other people bond easily over things that feel shallow to you, and wondering if something is wrong with you for not being able to do the same. The loneliness of craving a specific kind of connection, deep, honest, unhurried, willing to sit in silence without discomfort, and finding that kind of connection genuinely rare. The loneliness of being told again and again that your way of being is a problem to be solved rather than a nature to be understood. There is grief in knowing that the world rewards loudness, that the people who fill every silence, who are always available, always enthusiastic, always performing engagement, are the ones who tend to get seen. And that the quiet ones, the ones who are watching carefully, feeling deeply, thinking slowly and thoroughly, are so often invisible, so often misread, so often left to wonder if their depth is actually just distance in disguise. If you have felt that grief, I want you to hear this clearly. That grief is not evidence that something is wrong with you. That grief is the natural consequence of being a certain kind of person in a world that was not designed with you in mind. It is the ache of a square peg in a round world, not because the square peg is inferior, but because the world only has round holes. And here is what that grief often produces in people who have carried it for a long time. a kind of fierce and quiet self-reliance. A decision, usually not made consciously, but built slowly through experience, to find within themselves what the world has consistently failed to provide. Stability, understanding, validation, peace. They stop waiting to be understood and start building a life that does not require external understanding to function. They stop reaching for connections that leave them feeling more alone than before and start investing in the one relationship that has never let them down: the relationship with themselves. This is what psychologists sometimes describe as autonomous self-sufficiency, and it is one of the most powerful psychological capacities a person can develop. It is not the same as not needing others. It is the capacity to be whole and functional and at peace, even in the absence of external validation or connection. It is the ability to be your own witness, your own source of comfort, your own anchor. And people who have built this capacity are genuinely rare in a world that is increasingly dependent on external stimulation, on the constant dopamine drip of social media and entertainment and the approval of others. The ability to sit quietly with yourself and feel genuinely okay is something close to a superpower. What is something you wish someone had told you sooner about your need for solitude? Something that would have saved you years of wondering if you were the problem. Leave it in the comments. Someone reading right now may need to hear exactly what you have to say. But there is a tension here that deserves to be named, because this is where the psychology becomes more nuanced and more fragile. Because the same inner world that provides such deep sustenance can, if you are not careful, become a place you never leave. The same capacity for self-sufficiency that is so hard-won and so valuable can, over time, harden into something more like a wall than a foundation. The solitude that once healed can start, slowly and almost imperceptibly, to isolate. This is not inevitable, but it is a risk that people who love being alone need to understand honestly. Because the nervous system that finds social interaction depleting will always, on some level, prefer the quiet. The mind that has learned that vulnerability is costly will always, on some level, lean toward protection. And the person who has built a rich and sustaining inner world will always, on some level, find it easier to stay inside it than to risk the disruption of letting someone else in. And there comes a point where easier is not the same as better, where the preference for solitude shades into avoidance of something that, while difficult, is also necessary, where the quiet that once felt like oxygen starts to feel like something else, like a room with no windows, safe but sealed. The question that psychologists ask, and that people who love solitude would do well to ask themselves honestly, is this: is my solitude a choice I am making from a place of fullness? Or is it a protection I am maintaining from a place of fear? Am I alone because I genuinely thrive here? Or because the prospect of being misunderstood again, of being too much again, of reaching out and finding nothing there, feels like more than I can bear? Both of those things can be true simultaneously. The solitude can be genuinely nourishing, and also in certain moments, a way of avoiding something real. Holding both of those truths without collapsing one into the other is itself a form of psychological maturity. Because here is what the research on human flourishing consistently shows. Connection is not optional, not in the deep sense, not if we are talking about a full and meaningful human life. Solitude is essential for certain kinds of people, genuinely essential, not just preferable. But so is the experience of being known by another person, of being seen not just by yourself, but by someone outside yourself who chooses to look carefully and stay. The people who thrive most fully are not the ones who choose between solitude and connection. They are the ones who have learned to move between both, honoring the need for quiet without letting it become a permanent exile from the world of other people. And this is where something beautiful happens in people who love being alone when they finally find the right kind of connection. Because when someone who has spent years carefully protecting their inner world decides to let another person into it, something extraordinary occurs. The depth that was always there, the richness of reflection and feeling and meaning-making that has been developing in solitude for years suddenly has somewhere to go. And the connection that forms is unlike anything that comes easily or quickly. It is built on genuine understanding, on careful observation, on the kind of trust that only forms when someone has been watching long enough to know that you are real. People who love being alone are extraordinarily attentive to the people they choose to trust. They notice whether your words match your behavior. They remember small details from things you said months ago. They pay attention to how you treat people who cannot do anything for you. They watch how you handle discomfort, how you respond when things do not go your way, how you move through the world when no one is performing for anyone. And long before you realize you have been observed, they have already formed a clear and careful understanding of who you actually are. This is not surveillance. This is not suspicion. It is the same meaning-seeking attention that they bring to everything turned toward the person they are considering letting in. And when that evaluation is complete, when they have seen enough to feel genuinely safe, the trust that follows is not casual. It is not the easy openness of someone who trusts everyone quickly and therefore trusts no one deeply. It is something rarer and more precious. It is the trust of someone who knows exactly what they are giving and has decided, carefully and deliberately, that you are worth giving it to. If you have ever been trusted by someone like this, you may already know what it feels like. It feels like being seen in a way that most people never quite manage. It feels like being known rather than just known about. And it is, in its way, one of the most profound gifts one person can offer another. Let us also talk about something that is often overlooked in discussions of people who love solitude: their relationship with boredom itself, or rather, the absence of it. Because the title of this exploration is not incidental, the fact that these individuals genuinely do not experience boredom in solitude the way others do is psychologically significant. and it points to something important about how their minds are organized. Boredom, from a psychological perspective, is not simply the absence of stimulation. It is the absence of engagement. It is the experience of having a mind that wants to be active and finding nothing in the current environment to be active with. And the reason so many people feel bored when they are alone is that they have not developed or have not given themselves permission to develop the internal resources that make solitude genuinely engaging. But the person who has built a rich inner world does not run out of things to think about, does not run out of questions to sit with, memories to revisit, ideas to turn over, feelings to understand. Their mind is not waiting for the external world to provide content. Their mind is generating content continuously from within, in the form of reflection and imagination, and the slow, satisfying work of making sense of things. This is sometimes described in psychological literature in terms of what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called the Autotelic personality, from the Greek for self-goal. The Autotelic person is someone who is capable of finding intrinsic reward in activities for their own sake, without needing external validation or stimulation to make those activities worthwhile. And people who love solitude tend to have highly developed autotelic capacity. They can be interested in their own thinking. They can find genuine pleasure in the quiet work of understanding. They are, in a very real sense, never bored because they are never without something genuinely interesting to engage with. And what is that something? It is themselves. Not in a narcissistic sense, not in the sense of being endlessly preoccupied with their own image or status, but in the sense of being genuinely curious about their own inner life, about why they feel what they feel, about what they actually believe and why, about the connections between their past experiences and their present reactions, about the questions that do not have easy answers and that keep returning in different forms across years and decades of a life. This is the kind of engagement that does not run dry, because the inner life is not finite. It is not a finite resource that gets used up. It is something that deepens and expands the more attention you bring to it. The more you explore it, the more there is to explore. The more questions you ask, the more interesting the questions become. And the person who has discovered this, who has learned that the territory of the self is genuinely inexhaustible, has found something that no amount of external entertainment can replicate. There is also something worth saying about the particular quality of rest that solitude provides for people who thrive in it. Not just physical rest, though that is part of it, but a deeper kind of rest. The rest of not having to perform, not having to modulate your expression for an audience, not having to be quick or impressive or appropriately enthusiastic or socially legible. The rest of being exactly as you are, without any of the constant, subtle adjustments that social interaction requires. For people who are highly sensitive to social cues, who are always, even unconsciously, reading the emotional temperature of a room and calibrating their behavior accordingly, this rest is not a luxury, it is a necessity. The energy required to navigate social environments at that level of attentiveness is genuinely significant, and without regular time to recover it, something essential starts to erode. Not just energy, but the sense of self, the clear internal signal of who you actually are, as distinct from who you are being in response to the people around you. Solitude is where that signal gets recalibrated, where you find your way back to yourself after the inevitable drift that comes from spending time in the social world. And for people who love being alone, returning to that signal, feeling it come back into clarity after the noise of interaction, is one of the most satisfying experiences available to them. It is coming home, and perhaps that is the most honest and complete way to describe what solitude is for people who genuinely thrive in it. It is not a retreat. It is not a hiding place. It is not evidence of damage or fear or social failure. It is home, the place where they are most fully themselves, the place where their minds work best, where their emotions settle, where their values become clear, where their creativity breathes, where their energy replenishes, where the constant low-level noise of having to navigate a world that was not designed for their particular kind of sensitivity finally goes quiet. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing to fix, nothing to overcome, nothing to apologize for. There is only the deep and valid truth that different minds have different needs, and that the need for solitude is as real and as legitimate as the need for company. That the person who finds genuine sustenance in their own company is not lacking something. They are simply living in alignment with who they actually are. If you are someone who has spent years being told that your love of solitude is a problem, I want to offer you something, not a solution, because there is nothing to solve, but a reframe, a different way of seeing what you have always had, that the world kept insisting was a deficit. Your depth is not detachment. Your quiet is not coldness. Your need for space is not rejection. Your rich inner life is not a consolation prize for failed social connection. It is the real thing. It is something that most people are too distracted, too afraid, too unwilling to be still long enough to build. And you have it. You have been building it, perhaps without even knowing that is what you were doing. Every time you chose the quiet room, every time you stayed home when you could have gone out, every time you sat with your own thoughts instead of reaching for something to fill the silence. You have been building a home inside yourself, and that is not nothing. That is, in many ways, everything. The world will continue to misunderstand you. People will continue to tell you that you should be more social, more open, more available, more present in the way they mean when they say present, which usually means visible and loud. And you will continue to know, in the quiet and certain way that you know things, that they are describing something that is not you. That what they are asking for is a performance of a self you do not have, and that the self you do have is something they may not have the language to recognize. But you have the language now, or at least more of it than you had before. And language for your experience is not a small thing. It is the beginning of being able to hold your own nature with something other than apology. To say, this is how I am, and this is why, and it makes sense, and it is not a flaw, and I do not need to be fixed. You are not broken. You are not lonely in the way people assume. You are not running from the world. You are listening to it in your own way, in your own time, in the only environment where you can hear it clearly. And that is enough. That has always been enough. If someone in your life has ever struggled to understand why you need so much time alone, or if you know someone quietly carrying this same experience without the words for it, consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is hand someone the language for something they have been living without a name for. It can open a conversation that needed to happen, or simply let someone know they are not as alone in this as they thought. If this video helped you feel seen, if it gave you language for something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, I hope you will stay. There is more here, more conversations like this one, more attempts to give words to the experiences that most people never quite find the right words for. Subscribe if you feel that this is a space that understands something about how you move through the world. And if you feel safe, share something in the comments. Not because you have to, but because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting alone with the same quiet truth you have been sitting with. And your voice, even a few words of it, might be exactly what they needed to feel a little less like the only one. Thank you for watching. And if this exploration of solitude and the inner world resonated with you, the video on the psychology of people who need emotional safety before physical closeness speaks directly to why people who live deeply inside themselves often require trust to be built slowly and carefully before they can truly let another person in. It is worth watching